This is Be Here Now, the third studio album by Oasis, and for some, a controversial moment in the Oasis canon. It was released in 1997 amid a firestorm of hype and frenzied overexcitement. Stores opened at midnight on release day to sell it, and the band were on the front cover of every paper.
I don't think anyone will ever be able to fully explain to people who are maybe teenagers now what a colossal thing Oasis was. There's big things in music now. I do festivals all over the world, and there are big bands. Fucking Oasis was 100 times bigger than all of them put together, do you know what I mean? Particularly in England, and you couldn't accurately describe it to anyone.
Following the heights of their first two albums, Definitely Maybe and What's the Story Morning Glory, the nation were on the edge of their seats waiting to hear what, by all accounts, was to be the band's finest shining moment. And there was a lot riding on it because they had said many times they were going to make 3 incredible albums and then they were going to quit, right at the top. In the NME on the 24th of June 95, Noel said, "I don't see this going on forever. I see it as 3 albums and that's it. I don't think I can do any more with Oasis after that. There's only so many anthems you can write. I don't know for sure, but I'd say the next album will be the last." And that next album was the one we're talking about today, Be Here Now. Definitely Maybe, What's the Story, Morning Glory and Be Here Now were meant to be a trilogy, a kind of era-defining set of albums after which Oasis, or at least Oasis as we knew them, would cease to exist. Noel said this to Select magazine on August the 1st, 97. When asked, how would you describe this record? You've hinted it sits between the previous 2 LPs. Noel replied, it's part 3 of a 3-part box set. In Rolling Stone, Noel said the whole of the first album is about escape. It's about getting away from the shitty, boring life of Manchester. The first album is about dreaming of being a pop star in a band. The second album is about actually being a pop star in a band. And the third album, Be Here Now, was about the view from the top. That album was all about the moments they knew they had finally arrived. Each of the 3 albums had an accompanying goal with it as well. The goal of Definitely Maybe was simply to get signed and in the charts. The goal of Morning Glory was to equal and then beat the Stone Roses. That was part of the reason they recorded that album at Rockfield Studios, because that's where the Stone Roses had just recorded their second album. And the goal of Be Here Now was to equal the Beatles. And so, of course, they went to Abbey Road to record that one. And this album was crafted in a somewhat Beatle-inspired way, especially when it came to including Easter eggs and imagery on the cover art. Hints, hidden references and wordplay for the fans to find. This album is like a carefully crafted message with many hidden layers and secrets beyond what you see on the surface. Today, I want to uncover as much of those coded meanings as I possibly can for you, and share an explanation of this album that, as far as I'm aware, no one else has ever shared before. Amusingly, Oasis's art director Brian Cannon said this in one of his videos.
And they chose these props at random, and the idea was, we've got a Rolls Royce in a swimming pool surrounded by all these bonkers objects that don't actually mean anything. It doesn't mean nothing. That's the whole point. It's completely random. Chose at random, doesn't symbolise anything.
So, with only the smallest roll of the eyes, let's just shamelessly take the bait once again and start this detective story by taking a deeper look at the Be Here Now cover art. Now, the grand overarching story being told by the first 3 albums is actually quite easily observable by just putting the 3 album covers side by side. They tell a picture story as well. The first album was Act 1, on the dole, unsigned and stuck in Manchester. There they are in Bonehead's old house. The second album, they were now in London and on their journey, with the help of Brian Cannon, their art director, and Owen Morris, their producer. And by the time of album 3, they had reached their destination at the top, in true rock and roll opulence, stately homes and Rolls Royces in swimming pools. This was the former stately home of the once head of the UK's Playboy clubs. It represented the decadent peak of the rock and roll mountain. But that's not all. We can also zoom in and find a ton of blatantly obvious connections with the imagery on the first album, the place they started in, and the imagery on the third one, their final destination. The two sleeves are actually like mirror images of each other. For example, in the cover art of Definitely Maybe, we see Noel holding an inflatable globe in a small room in Manchester. Then, at the end of the story, in Be Here Now, as if to underscore that theme of there we were, now here we are, we see Noel looking through a golden telescope mounted on an artist's easel, still looking at a globe, but now it's on a bronze urn atop an amplifier stack, with a Fender Jaguar standing in front of it. Noel's still got his eye on the whole world, but this time he's observing it from a very different vantage point. On the cover of Definitely Maybe, you can see Gwigsy watching a tiny portable-sized TV, showing the good, the bad and the ugly. And then, on the cover of Be Here Now, there is Gwigsy again, but now he's climbing fully clothed down into a swimming pool, while a space-age futuristic TV is showing Oasis themselves at that exact moment. Once they gazed at celebrity legends on the TV and dreamed of being like them. Now, they are those celebrity legends on the TV. Gwigsy was a famously quiet band member, barely speaking and preferring, by and large, to just stay silent and keep out of the limelight. He is, therefore, pictured in front of a sign that says silence. Very fitting for the quiet one in Oasis. On the back cover of Definitely Maybe, we see Bonehead strumming his electric guitar, sat on the hardwood floor. And then, on the cover of Be Here Now, we see Bonehead still strumming the guitar, but now it's been changed into a massive golden key. Some music magazines suggested that maybe this was wordplay, referring to the idea of playing in key, but I think it's probably a little more in keeping with the ongoing theme of there we were, now here we are. Bonehead's guitar playing had been a literal golden key. Without it, he would not have become a mega wealthy worldwide rock star. On the Be Here Now album cover, we also have Alan White, the drummer, who wasn't actually in the band at the time of Definitely Maybe. So instead of getting a kind of progression picture from him, instead we get a little bit of picture wordplay. An abacus, which is used for counting, and a large clock face, which is used to tell the time. And here we have the drummer, the man who counts time for the band. And he's also sitting on an hourglass, even more symbolism for keeping time. And lastly, here is Liam in the cover art of Definitely Maybe, a young, fresh-faced Manchester kid mucking about on a scooter. And now here he is on the cover of Be Here Now, a slightly older man at this point, but still riding his scooter, albeit a much upgraded one. And so you can see Liam, Bonehead, Gwigsy and Noel, who appeared on the cover of Definitely Maybe, all also appear on the cover of Be Here Now, but showing now how they've changed, grown, and just how far they have come as a band. There are many other little Easter eggs on that album cover art as well, indicating that Oasis are now the next chapter in British rock and roll legend. The Rolls Royce in the swimming pool is a reference to Keith Moon and The Who reportedly crashed a big posh car into a swimming pool during a wild party out on tour. And the number plate of the car, that's the number plate on the black vehicle in the background of the Beatles' Abbey Road cover shoot. And the implication is clear. This was meant to be Oasis's Abbey Road, their massive final masterwork. In front of Liam, we see an old gramophone with a record on it, and in the cover art you can see Noel putting whatever the record is on there. It's hard to see clearly because the picture is a bit blurred, but I think that says Burt Bacharach. So there is another of their musical heroes referenced in the cover. But why have I started with this? Why have I opened up by showing all the little links and hidden connections in the Be Here Now cover art? Well, it's because, to me at least, it seems at least feasible that if they put that level of planning and symbolism just into the cover art, it seems not just plausible, but in fact likely that they did just as much, if not more so, when it comes to the much deeper matter of the songs and the lyrics themselves. Over the years, main songwriter Noel Gallagher has been repeatedly accused of writing nonsense, meaningless lyrics. And sometimes in interviews, while hamming up his working class roots to give good copy, he himself has played up to this stereotype as well. Anyone who seriously follows Oasis for a while quickly realises just how much effort Noel puts into creating, building up and maintaining his own myth. For example, he would often lie about having just written some brilliant song while sitting on the train on the way to meet his label boss, Alan McGee, when in fact, in reality, he had been slaving over it and developing it for months on end.
I think he had 50 songs when he met me, and he used to lie, and he used to tell me that he'd just written one on the train. And I think the guy had been writing for about 5 years before he met me, and he had about 50 songs, and he had the first 2 albums.
Even though he did repeatedly try to get people to believe that his songs were just these quick, rushed, scribbled down things done in 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there, the truth is Noel agonised over getting his lyrics right. Noel claimed many times in the 90s that he wrote Wonderwall in just 5 minutes. The truth came out later that it had actually been the labour of many, many months. And some songs he would literally spend years on. In one place, post-90s, he admitted it took him 8 years to write the song Let There Be Love. Despite his claims of accidental genius and meaningless lyrics in the 90s, you get a clearer picture from this much more recent quote. When asked about his songwriting process, Noel said, "I must have been asked to write songs for people about 20 times. Hey man, we should write some songs together. Fucking write your own songs. I spent 46 years busting my arse to get here, slaving over a line in a song for a month. So no, I won't write a song with you, you little prick." Now, of course, I'm sharing all these quotes because I believe Noel Gallagher wrote the lyrics to the songs on Be Here Now with a much grander and deeper meaning in mind than most people realise. And in 1995, the period we're going to be talking about today, he did actually hint that he had intentionally been encoding another layer of meaning into his songs. When asked by an NME journalist what he had been writing about, he said all the stuff on Definitely Maybe was written when we didn't have a record deal, and I wasn't writing with anything in mind, I was just writing. But now when I write something, I think of what all the people, in brackets, are going to read into it. I know I shouldn't, but I can't help it. That's pretty clear, isn't it? Noel is writing his lyrics bearing in mind that people are going to be analysing them and looking for the deeper meaning, in brackets. And because Be Here Now doesn't get anything like the attention that the first 2 albums get, I reckon there is loads of stuff in there that's never been dug up, that's never been brought out into the light. So as it seems likely that there is some hidden treasure buried down deep in this album to find, let's start digging. We'll start by trying to figure out which time period we should be digging in.
On Definitely Maybe I wrote one song in the studio which was Slide Away. Everything else was written 2 years before we actually even got a record deal. We've had the actual recorded output of the band, and it's like, as like the artist, we're like 2 years ahead of everybody else because we know what the next album's going to be like, right, and the one after that.
As Noel said elsewhere, Definitely Maybe is about the time that came right before. It's about being unsigned and dreaming of being a famous rock band. The second album, What's the Story Morning Glory, contains songs like Don't Look Back in Anger, which are about events that happened right before on the Definitely Maybe tour, and everything that was going on in Noel Gallagher's life at that time. And so, in keeping with that theory, I decided to have a look at the lyrics to Be Here Now and see if they too would line up with what happened just before, in the Morning Glory era, in exactly the same pattern. If this is the third instalment in the trilogy, we should expect there's a good chance it will follow the same basic layout as the other 2. So, if the songs on Be Here Now should be written about the events that directly preceded the making of the album, the first thing I needed was a starting point, some kind of anchor, a song which I could pin down and say this song is most likely about this historical event. Because once you have that, you can then start building out, going from song to song and event to event to see if they all match up again. And the most obvious place to start, to me at least, seemed to be track 2, My Big Mouth. Noel Gallagher has always been notorious for saying really outrageous things in the press and for insulting other musicians. But there is one particular moment that stands out above all the others for the level of controversy. And that was right in the middle of the war of words that was the Battle of Brit Pop, when Oasis went head-to-head with Blur in a chart battle for the #1 position on the UK singles chart. That whole thing had apparently been entirely engineered by Damon Albarn from Blur and the music magazine the NME. But once Blur began repeatedly moving the release date of their single, Country House, to force Oasis to compete against them with their single, Roll With It, insults began to fly, and it was in this era, in August 1995, that Noel Gallagher had probably his most notorious and offensive moment, saying that he hoped Alex and Damon from the band Blur would die of AIDS. Even in the gobby 90s, that was considered a bit too far, and Noel had to backtrack and apologise. Over the years, he's had many other controversial moments, but if Oasis fans had to pick the biggest one, really, that is probably it. So, I don't know if you agree, but to me, that seems like the easiest question to start out with. Is the song My Big Mouth about the war of words during the Battle of Britpop? If you watched my first Masterplan Conspiracy video, you may remember the historical part of the story ended with the band at Rockfield starting work on their second album. And this story seemingly picks up exactly where the last one left off, with the band still at Rockfield, hearing the news that Blur keep moving the date of their single release to force the Battle of Britpop.
We were quite offended at the time. We were sat in Rockfield and Alan McGee came down and said, well, they've moved their single back. You know, they had it ready to go like 2 weeks before and they decided to stop it and move it back so it was on the same day as ours. It was a chance, it was their last chance really to drag themselves up on the coattails of my band really. And, you know, the NME losing readers by the thousands every week. The way I see it is Steve Sutherland saying to Damon Albarn, you should have released a single on the same day as them. We'll sell a shitload of papers and you'll sell a shitload of records.
Let's take a closer look at the lyrics to My Big Mouth and see if we're on the right tracks here. Around this town you've ceased to be, that's what you get for sleeping with the enemy. Where angels fly, you won't play, so guess who's going to take the blame for my big mouth and my big name? I'll put on my shoes while I'm walking slowly down the Hall of Fame. Into my big mouth you could fly a plane. I'll put on my shoes while I'm walking slowly down the Hall of Fame. When Noel discovered that this whole thing had been cooked up by Blur and the NME, he was not impressed. And bearing that in mind, we can actually see another different layer of meaning in the line, around this town you've ceased to be, that's what you get for sleeping with the enemy. That's what you get for sleeping with the NME. And even though in the CD sleeve the album lyrics say the word enemy, in his book Getting High, Paolo Hewitt reports that it really was originally the NME. But that's not the only lyrical omission when it comes to this song in the sleeve. There is actually a line that is completely missing from the lyrics on the sleeve, the lyrics on the Oasis website, the Spotify lyrics, and pretty much everywhere else as well. If you listen carefully to the second bridge of the song on the record, Liam doesn't sing "Around this town you've ceased to be." On that bridge he says, "And now your song has ceased to be." That's what you get for sleeping with the NME. And when they debuted this track at Knebworth, he also repeatedly says, "Your song." Have a listen. So this is about a singer who is in bed with the NME and is also connected to a moment in which Noel Gallagher seriously opened his big mouth. Now let's have a look at the lyrics to the second verse, because there's a bit of archaeology we can do there as well. I ain't never spoke to God and I ain't never been to heaven, but you assumed I knew the way, even though the map was given. And as you look into the eyes of a bloody cold assassin, only then you'll realise with whose life you have been messing. In multiple places, Noel describes himself as being good at character assassination. And here in this song, he seems to be telling the recipient that they have bitten off more than they can chew. And again, we have a double meaning here, because Noel Gallagher is doing something he would do fairly often from here onwards. He's quoting and paraphrasing poetry, Some of the words to this verse come from a poem by Emily Dickinson. Here is the original very short poem. I never saw a moor, I never saw the sea, yet now I know how the heather looks, and what a wave must be. I never spoke with God, nor visited in heaven, yet certain am I of the spot, as if the chart were given. And the hidden meaning here, the meaning that's in brackets, as Noel puts it, is this. Oasis lost the chart battle with Blur. They charted less than their rivals. And do you know what the title is of this poem? Chartless. Chart less. And did you know that the Blur and Oasis rivalry actually started in the first place because Liam Gallagher and Damon Albarn were fighting over the same girl? Liam Gallagher was interested in a lass called Lisa Moorish, and in that time, Damon Albarn slept with her. Did you know the name Moorish means someone who is a Moor? That's an old-fashioned term which has come to mean someone who has a historical North African identity. Here we have a situation involving Lisa Moorish, and Noel chooses to use a poem that is also often called by its opening line. I never saw a Moor. I've no idea if that was intentional or not, but if it was, blimey. The Battle of Brit Pop and the accompanying war of words took place in August 1995. So, if this theory is correct, we might look for something that happened directly chronologically next for the band to match whatever song comes next on the album. Song 3 on the album is Magic Pie, so let's take a quick look at what we see in the lyrics. They are sleeping while they dream, and then they want to be adored. But they who don't say what they mean will live and die by their own sword. But I'll have my way in my own time. I'll have my say, my star will shine. 'Cause you see me, I got my magic pie. Think of me, yeah, that was me, I was that passerby. I've been, and now I've gone. Now who is this verse about? Who are they? Stone Roses fans will probably already have noticed that this verse references two different Roses tracks, I Wanna Be Adored and Your Star Will Shine, one from both their albums. So what we're looking for is something that comes next, chronologically, that references the Stone Roses if possible, right after all the furore over Noel's AIDS comment. Oasis moved quickly to limit the damage. Noel released a press release apologising for his remarks. When Noel returned home that Wednesday afternoon, he was to find a message on his answer machine asking him if he would be available to be photographed with the Stone Roses for a potential NME cover. The project was the Help album, a record that would raise cash for the victims of the Bosnian War and attempt to enter the record books by being recorded, produced and distributed within a week. So, the answer to the question is blatantly yes. Next came the War Child Help charity album. Oasis recorded the opening track, and the Stone Roses were on it too, recording the third song. Blur were also on the War Child album, but they had been relegated to the position usually reserved in album track listings for the least good song, or the weird one, second from last, track 19. And here's another really interesting point of connection between what happened in the Battle of Brit Pop and what happened at the War Child Help album recording sessions. If you remember, the whole fallout between Oasis and Blur started over a girl, Lisa Moorish. Surely it can't be mere accident or coincidence that on the semi-acoustic version of Fade Away Oasis performed, there is a female backing singer. And it's Lisa Moorish. There's some continuity there, isn't there? The Help album was a massively significant moment for Oasis for another reason, however, because at this point, they had achieved their second goal. They really had now overtaken the Stone Roses. They were billing higher than them, so to speak. Oasis were first, the Roses were third. Oasis had passed them by. Stage 2 of their big picture mission was more or less complete. But what is that magic pie bit about? You see me, I've got my magic pie? As we've already seen, after beating the Stone Roses, the next goal was to equal the Beatles. And I reckon the idea of having your magic pie might have some connection to this little quote from Noel Gallagher's biggest hero, John Lennon. This is taken from a piece he wrote in the Mersey Beat called On the Dubious Origins of the Beatles. Beatles, how did the name arrive? It came in a vision. A man appeared on a flaming pie and said unto them, From this day on, you are Beatles with an A. Thank you, Mr. Man, they said, thanking him. It's a famous piece of nonsense writing from Mr. Wordplay himself. But does it have any connection to that day of recording for the Help War Child album? Also on those sessions was Paul McCartney, and Noel spent a bit of time with him and played in a band with him. McCartney himself was coming to the tail end of preparations for the release of the Beatles anthology, which was coming out 2 months later. And there had apparently been a quite funny, mild battle of wills between him and Yoko Ono over being allowed to include that silly little passage I read you about the flaming pie. Because despite how obviously silly, goon-esque and just written for a laugh the whole passage is, Yoko apparently believed it was literal, that Lennon really did have that vision and had been guided to his ultimate destiny by a man who appeared on a flaming pie. Round about the exact same time, Paul said, Now it turned out that we couldn't have this in the anthology because Yoko believes that John did have a vision. I'm very friendly with Yoko now, so I don't want this to look like a snide thing, but it genuinely intrigues me that she thinks this. A man came to me on a flaming pie. I know, in my mind, that John didn't have a vision about this, but the way Yoko puts it is, if it's okay for Paul to dream yesterday, then it's okay for John to have a vision. So, at the time of the recording of the Help War Child album, this was presumably all going on in the background. So, I think it's quite possible that Paul McCartney talked about it with Noel, because shortly thereafter, Noel wrote a song called Magic Pie, and Paul McCartney wrote a song and released an album called Flaming Pie. And I think Noel's song is about him saying he's had his own vision and his own encounter with the man on the flaming pie, so to speak, and he too is now on his way to fulfill his destiny. In Q magazine, Noel revealed that the first verse is specifically about Liam, verse 2 seems to be clearly about the Stone Roses, and verse 3 seems to be written about himself. And in that third verse we get a quote from the Labour conference, appropriated for the Oasis story. There are but 1,000 days, preparing for 1,000 years. 1,000 days is a little under 3 years, and round about the time of the recording of the Help album, that's very close to the amount of time they'd actually spent recording and releasing records. But let's keep the pattern going. Let's move on to the next track and ask the same question. What is the next song about, and does it line up with what happened next chronologically? Track 4 on Be Here Now is Stand By Me. Let's take a look at the lyrics. Made a meal and threw it up on Sunday. I've got a lot of things to learn. Said I would, and I'll be leaving one day, before my heart starts to burn. Stand by me. Nobody knows the way it's going to be. Noel hasn't actually given us much to go on about this song. He's given us one very small hint, that it's connected to his mother, Peggy. And you can see in the deluxe version liner notes, the opening lines are about a phone call with his mum. So this is connected to Peggy, but at least some of it is also clearly about his girlfriend Meg as well. At least some of this song seems to be in the context of a loving relationship, and the cover art does seem to confirm that theme. Of course, it's not much to go on, but what we're looking for next is some kind of setting in which Meg and Peggy both show up, if possible, and it should occur in chronological, historical order once again. Somehow, Sunday the 1st of October 1995 became the first day of Oasis's week-long British tour in support of their second album. There was a party to launch the album at the Pavilion, a swank gentleman's club in Knightsbridge. The party had been organised by Meg Matthews, Noel's girlfriend of the past year and a half. Noel arrived just after noon. The first thing he saw when he walked in the room was a huge ice block that spelt the band's name. In the adjoining room there was a big buffet and a 4-piece string quartet playing classical versions of the new album. Liam arrived. He wore shades and an immaculate 3/4 length Mac. With him was the singer Lisa M. That's Lisa Moorish. See how the story just seems to continue track by track? One surprise guest, Peggy Gallagher, Noel and Liam's mother, had been invited. Meg had secretly arranged for her to be there. It was Peggy's first ever visit to London. Later on that day, Meg and Lisa M would take her sightseeing. The first time Noel saw her walking through the crowd, he thought to himself, God, that looks like my mum. The next minute, he was hugging her, proudly introducing her to all his friends. Throughout the whole party, he and Liam would linger protectively by her side. So we were looking for the next thing chronologically to include Peggy in some way, and it does, but not only that, it also includes Peggy and Noel standing by her and her standing by him, literally, not even figuratively, throughout that party. Stand By Me is not only a metaphor, but it's actually a description of what literally happened. That party carried on until 3 in the afternoon, and then a load of them went out all round London right up until midnight, when they held the official launch of What's the Story Morning Glory at the Virgin Megastore on Oxford Street, which was now technically on the next day. And that is, of course, chronologically speaking, the next big event in the Oasis calendar that we might expect to match up to a song, if this theory is true. It's been very well documented that Oasis lost the Battle of Brit Pop with the song Roll With It, but then went on to win the war with the album What's the Story Morning Glory. And bearing in mind that My Big Mouth seemed to be about that first lost chart battle, I had wondered if there was a second chapter, another song somewhere, that seemed to close that story arc, where they later go on to win the war. Let's take a look at the lyrics to the next song, and in my opinion the best song on the album, I Hope I Think I Know. The first half goes like this. They're trying hard to put me in my place, and that is why I've got to keep running. The future's mine and it's no disgrace, 'cause in the end the past means nothing. You tell me I'm free, then you tie me down, and from my chains I think it's a pity. What did it cost you to wear my crown? You don't like me, why don't you admit it? I feel a little down today, and I ain't got much to say, but you're gonna miss me when I'm not there. You know I don't care. Look at that line, what did it cost you to wear my crown? Who's that about? There are very few people who, in this era, took Noel Gallagher's crown. This song's an interesting one because it's kind of in two halves. You've got the first half talking about Noel being kind of down and sort of seemingly losing a battle, and then the second half is about whoever the song's being sung to being kind of down and Noel winning. You're trying hard to put me in my place, and that is why I've got to keep running. The future's mine and it's your disgrace, 'cause in the end your laugh means nothing. Do you feel a little down today? Bet you ain't got much to say. Who's gonna miss you when you're not there? You know we don't care. So now look at that line. The future's mine and it's your disgrace, 'cause in the end your laugh means nothing. So who briefly took Noel Gallagher's crown and was publicly mocking him? At this time really there's only one candidate, it was Blur. And now a day has come where they feel a little down, where the tables have turned and they haven't got much to say. When they won the Battle of Britpop, Blur had really gloated and rubbed it in. They played Top of the Pops with Alex the bass player wearing an Oasis shirt. Damon had compared Oasis to Status Quo on the radio, and Blur had set up a gig in Bournemouth on the same night as Oasis and were planning to project the number one onto the building while Oasis played. Blur really had been absolutely savage in victory in August. This song to me reads like two halves of the same story. We start out with Noel losing in the first half, but by the second half he's winning. And the chorus seems to fit as well. It talks about hits and misses and verbal abuse. And then there's that line, you don't like me, why don't you admit it? Once Morning Glory had come out, once the tables had turned and Oasis were now on top, Blur and Damon particularly repeatedly tried to make nice. But Oasis weren't having it. Having felt stomped on from a great height when Blur had beaten them, I think they made up their minds to make sure they gave as good as they got when the boot was on the other foot.
Blur may have won the battle for the number one single, but with their new album crashing straight in at number one, it looks like Oasis are set to win the war.
So that's how I would interpret this song. If My Big Mouth was the Battle of Britpop, this is the release of What's the Story Morning Glory, the moment when Noel knew the tide had started to turn. So if this is the day Oasis released Morning Glory, which is October the 2nd, 1995, what's the next song, and does that line up with what happened next chronologically once again? Track 6 is The Girl in the Dirty Shirt, and that is, of course, Noel's girlfriend, Meg Matthews. Explaining how she got that nickname in Q magazine, Noel said, "You guessed it, Meg is the girl in the dirty shirt. We were doing a gig in Brighton just before me and Meg were going out. She was at the hotel ironing a dirty shirt because she hadn't brought enough clothes with her." I know, it sounds a bit soft. But actually, when you look at the lyrics themselves, it's not all that soft. There's actually the suggestion there of some kind of conflict or fallout. Let's have a look at what they say. "If I may be so bold, could I just say something? Come and make me my day. The clouds around your soul don't gather there for nothing, but I can chase them all away. Why do you need a reason for to feel happy, or be shining for the rest of the world? Give me just a smile and would you make it snappy? Get your shit together, girl." Meg has clouds around her soul. She's frowning and unhappy. I wonder why. You've got a feeling lost inside. It just won't let you go. Your life is sneaking up behind. It just won't let you go. This isn't a straight up love song, is it? Meg seems to be gutted. And I think we might get the clue as to why here in the last verse. If you ever find yourself inside a bubble, you've got to make your own way home. The Bubble is a name they had for being out on tour. They used that phrase to describe that enclosed little world the band lived in when they were out on the road. And right after the album launch on the 2nd of October 1995, they did actually go out on tour, on a week's tour of the UK to promote the album. So, chronologically, what we're looking for now is a bit of a fallout between Noel and Meg while they're on this British tour, with a reference to the bubble thrown in for good measure. And yet again, of course, that's exactly what we get. Noel jumps onto the coach floor, collects his bag and wearily walks up the coach aisle. Like the others, the week has caught up with him. Too many late nights, not enough sleep. And worse than that, Meg is due to arrive tonight, and to be honest, Noel just isn't in the mood. Not because he doesn't want to see her, but because this is what touring does. It puts you in a bubble, and demands a state of mind which is very hard for people outside to penetrate, no matter how close to you they are. The coach made the short journey back to the hotel, and not long after, Noel and Meg got into an argument. "How long are you going to be pissed off with me for?" Meg demanded. "Until I get off tour," Noel snapped. Meg let Noel go, and then stayed up all night in the bar, catching the crew bus home. So, once again, chronologically, next in line, we find Meg, inside a bubble, having to make her own way home. This was October the 6th, 1995, so we are still moving through the tracks in order and through history, also in order. So far, it does all seem to be lining up, doesn't it? But I don't blame you if you're not fully convinced just yet. And, of course, the girl in the dirty shirt is not all grouchy, leave me alone vibes. Noel also says things like, "You can call me any time. Now you know you're not alone." And in the chorus, he seems to be saying, "Once I'm back, let's go out dancing together." It's not really a nasty song. It's more a kind of, we've had an argument, now let's make up kind of song. So let's keep going. What story does the next track tell? And does it once more line up with what happened next historically? Track 7 is Fade In Out. Get on the roller coaster. The fair's in town today. You've got to be bad enough to beat the brave. Get on the helter skelter. Bowl into the fray. You've got to be bad enough to beat the brave. You fade in out. Without a doubt. I don't see no shine. Today is just a daydream. Tomorrow we'll be cast away. Coming in out of nowhere, singing Rhapsody. You've got to be bad enough to want to be. Sitting upside a high chair, the devil's refugee is going to be blinded by the light that follows me. Every line in this song seems to be kind of saying the same thing. It's kind of pleading with someone to get on the roller coaster, to be a bit badder, a bit braver, to get on the helter skelter, to get back into the fray. This person is called the devil's refugee. And what is a devil's refugee? It's someone who has fled the devil, isn't it? A refugee from the devil. Someone connected with Oasis has run away from the devil, and Noel is pleading with them to come back to the circus. And guess what happened next, right after that 1 week tour? While Noel stayed with producer Owen Morris in London mixing new B-sides for the upcoming Wonderwall single, Liam, drummer Alan White and bass player Guigsy went to Paris. And at this point, thanks to Liam, all hell broke loose. The circus 100% came to town. They went to Paris with security guard Ian Robertson, and I'll tell the story of what happened there in his words. We were in Paris to fulfil an important but fairly leisurely press and promotion commitment. Our final commitment of the day is a live radio broadcast from a trendy watering hole. Amid the buzz, Eddie Izzard arrives and sits down with one of his entourage. Eddie is great company, both funny and self-effacing. I make sure everyone is surrounded by drinks as Liam takes his turn at the microphone. After a while, Eddie moves over to join the radio host and Liam. At first, the air is floating with pleasantries, but then Eddie begins to answer questions in half-decent French, completely charming the DJ. The spotlight is turned away from Liam, and the singer's face in the shadows now reads somewhere between sullen and murder. The first clue that all is not well in Radioland is a chair shooting backwards into a startled table of students. Liam is standing, snarling, spewing out his feelings without benefit of thought or censor. Liam shouts over my shoulder to Guigsy and Alan, "Let's get out of this shithole, bollocks to the radio and bollocks to Izzard." But no one is interested in going anywhere with Liam in this mood. Alan and Guigsy also get a final jagged onslaught. "Guigs, you fat c***, White, you c***, you're not in my band. Fuck off, the lot of you. You're not fucking in my band. You don't deserve to be in Oasis. You can both fuck off." It's a parting shot that hits deep. I can see the wind coming out of the Oasis Rhythm section's sails as we leave. Today, this has become a fairly well-known story, but Liam basically had some complete hysterical episode. He was jumping out of moving cabs, verbally abusing everyone. He violently assaulted Ian Robertson, the author, and then fired him. But it's bass player Guigsy that I want to focus in on here, because Robertson shares a behind-the-scenes account of what really happened next. Back at the hotel, Robertson got on the phone to drummer Alan White, who told him that after they'd gone back, Liam had tracked them down again in the bar and subjected them to a further barrage of verbal abuse. He ripped into me and Guigs again, really fucking vicious. I had to go back, but Guigsy was slaughtered by it. I sat up with him. He was shaking, he was so upset. He said he didn't want anything more to do with the band. I know how he feels. I don't want to be in America stuck on a bus with that nutter. Guigsy said about 3 hours later he comes back in going, "You fucking dicks," and he's got a coat on but no shirt. His coat was open and he was bare-chested, and he's going, "You fucking dicks, you fucking knobs." So I just got off. I was like, I'm going home. I'm not doing any press. So the next morning I refused to do any more interviews and went home. Robertson says, I meet Guigsy in the hotel lobby. He has chosen not to say goodbye to anyone, and so we push out into the wind and rain with no further ado. Guigsy turns as he puts his ticket back into his coat pocket. I'm off then. I shake his hand. And by the sound of what came next for Guigsy, Liam had given him some kind of PTSD. The guy was absolutely traumatised. His nerves absolutely destroyed. Guigsy went back to England to take some time out to just process and recover. His body had given up on him. His nerves were shot right through. Every time he even thought about a bass guitar, a feeling of abject sickness erupted in his stomach. He stayed in bed, closed his eyes, and slept for 20 hours straight. Then he went round to Marcus's house. That's the band's manager. It was Friday. Guigsy told him, "Look, if I can't get out of bed, I can't tour. Therefore, I can't be in the band, so you'll have to get someone else." Then he left to see a doctor, and Oasis were forced to handle another major crisis. This all happened right after that 1 week British tour and just before the band were due to fly off to America. And looking at how Liam behaved at the time, it kinda makes sense that Noel might describe Guigsy here as the devil's refugee, a man who fled from Liam, who was basically being the devil incarnate at the time. I think Fading Out has been written by Noel to Guigsy. I think it's him pleading with Guigsy to come back to the circus. To be brave enough, to be bad enough, to get back on the roller coaster, back on the helter-skelter, to bowl back into the fray. Yes, sometimes Oasis was a circus. Yes, sometimes Liam behaved like the devil, but Noel still wanted Gwigsy back. And then there's that interesting line about sitting upside a high chair. That conjures up a picture of being looked after by your mother, doesn't it? Did you know Gwigsy went back to Manchester, to his mother's house, during his time of recovery? The abuse of Gwigsy and his subsequent leaving of the band was not the only thing that made this a dark period, however, because, contrary to what the band had been expecting, the initial reviews for Morning Glory were out, and they were brutal. The NME called it a nervous peek through the curtains, not a bold rise and shine. Melody Maker wrote, Oasis are fallen, fallen short of the stars, they sound knackered. Vox wrote, measured against the Great Escape, Blur are better. And Q said it was a wasted opportunity if you're being generous. So they lost their bass player, they were getting trashed in the press, but it still wasn't over yet. Because now we come to the darkest track on the album, a song called Don't Go Away. And if these songs really are all in historical order, it seems that all the darkness was descending upon them all at the same time. After France, after losing Gwigsy, the band were due to fly out to America and they had a replacement bass player, Scott McLeod. Now look at these lyrics. Cold and frosty morning, there's not a lot to say about the things caught in my mind. And as the day was dawning, my plane flew away with all the things caught in my mind. And I want to be there when you're coming down. And I want to be there when you hit the ground. So don't go away. Say what you say. Say that you'll stay forever and a day in the time of my life. 'Cause I need more time. Yes, I need more time just to make things right. Liam Gallagher claims to have cried whilst recording the song as a result of dwelling on a certain thing. He said in a 1997 interview, I just thought, fuck that, I can't be singing this song. And I had to go away and sort myself out. Noel gave a little more context in an interview with Q magazine, and you can actually see that quote in the liner notes to the deluxe edition of Be Here Now. We talked about life and death a lot, thinking about our mums passing away. Don't Go Away? That's about my mum. The angst at the core of Don't Go Away is essentially about the death of a loved one, and specifically about their mother, Peggy, who had had a health scare while Oasis were on tour. Noel was explicit about this at the time. It's a very sad song about not wanting to lose someone close to you. Liam also felt the weight of the song. While recording his vocal and fearing he was about to cry, he had to leave the booth to compose himself. However, we also see from the liner notes regarding the demo version of this song that the song itself was actually written at least 3 years earlier, in 1994. And I don't know, but I think what might have been going on here that was causing the band to have these conversations about what it would be like to lose one of their mums is that the worst was actually happening to Bonehead. Peggy's health scare turned out thankfully to be just that, but Bonehead's mother, Delia, had also suffered medically at the same time, and she sadly died from cancer before Be Here Now's release. The album is consequently dedicated to the eternal memory of Delia Arthurs. At this point, you probably couldn't imagine things getting any worse, but they did. Because while out on tour in America, stand-in bass player Scott McLeod quit and went home. Compared to previous excursions, this was a short US tour. Earl's Court was looming, and nobody wanted an exhausted Oasis taking the stage. But after the Pittsburgh show, tour manager Maggie was sitting by herself on the coach when Scott McLeod, the temporary bassist, sat down beside her. I want to go home, he stated. Yeah, don't we all? She lightly agreed. No, I want to go home, he said. Which is what he did. While the band slept, he demanded that Maggie get him a flight to Manchester. He flew out the next day, with 4 gigs to go. When they woke up, Oasis was stunned to find another member had flown the coop. And now we come to the song Be Here Now and the gig Earl's Court. And up to this point, there's been a lot of kind of coincidences, but in this case, my God, there's a lot. They released Wonderwall and played Earl's Court on the same week. The band had been through one of the darkest times in their history, but the sun was just about to rise. Let's look at the lyrics to Be Here Now. Wash your face in the morning sun. Flash your pan at the song that I'm singing. Morning Glory, the morning sun, was doing the business at last. The music magazines had written Oasis off as a flash in the pan, but the people had other ideas. Touchdown bass, living on the run. Make no sweat of the hole that you're digging. Touchdown bass, living on the run. Change one letter and all of a sudden it makes sense. Remember what Noel said about putting hidden meanings in brackets? Earl's Court was where the bass player, Gwigsy, came back, where he touched down with the band once more after having spent some time on the run. Be my magic carpet ride, fly me down to capital city in the sun. Capital city, where is Earl's Court? London. Sing a song for me, one from Let It Be. Open up your eyes, get a grip of yourself inside. Who is Noel asking to sing a song here? Did you know that at Earl's Court, Oasis was supported by the bootleg Beatles? And concertarchives.org suggest they may have played the song Get Back at that gig, which is one from Let It Be. And there's still more. This song wasn't originally called Be Here Now, it was called Trip Inside. At the time of Earl's Court, Oasis had just released Wonderwall like 5 days before, on October the 30th. I remember it well, and that was the moment really. That was where they went from punk indie upstarts to global megastars. Wonderwall refused to leave the charts. Every week, more and more people were walking into record shops and purchasing it, as well as the Morning Glory album, pushing the band to a level of popularity that not even they, the proud, determined new Mancunians, had ever dreamt about. No one had. They all thought at the start they would equal the Stone Roses' success. Now their records really were starting to approach Beatles-like sales. After all that hardship and all that disaster came Wonderwall and Earl's Court. Their moment of victory was approaching. The deluxe version of Be Here Now included the Mustique demos, and one of those tracks was meant to be the original demo of the song Be Here Now, which was then called Trip Inside. But they actually ended up pulling that track at the last minute, I assume due to some kind of copyright issue. But there was a problem, because they'd already publicly released the track listing. So when it came out, that track had the same name, but the audio had been replaced by just a very long, meandering guitar instrumental with a bit of Talk Tonight in it. Thankfully, however, someone posted the original Trip Inside demo on YouTube, and this version has slightly different lyrics in the chorus. The original lyrics to the chorus say this: "Sing a song for me, one from Let It Be. Come on, stand inside of the wall, on a trip inside." Stand inside of the wall? I hardly have to ask, but what wall is most associated with Oasis? Of course it's Wonderwall, isn't it? Wonderwall, which had just come out. Surely all these references cannot be coincidental, can they? This is Earl's Court. But there's still more, because the Blur story isn't quite over yet. In the song Country House, Blur showed that they were not above referencing Oasis in their lyrics, with the line, "He's got morning glory and life's a different story," a direct reference to What's the Story, Morning Glory. I think, and I think Noel thought as well, that another song on their album was much more specifically about them. It's a song called Top Man, and that song includes these lines: "He's never cheap or cheerful, he's Hugo and he's boss, he's riding through the desert on a camel light, and on a magic carpet he'll fly away tonight." I think the line, "Be my magic carpet ride, fly me down to capital city in the sun in Be Here Now," might be responding to this song. But let's keep going. What's the next track? And does it line up again with what Oasis did next? Next came the Morning Glory World Tour, and of course the next song is All Around the World.
All Around the World was written before we had a manager. I was in our rehearsal room in 1993 playing All Around the World. And I remember saying to Bonehead, and he kept saying, "Why don't we record that song?" And I'd say, "No, that's for the third album." And this is before we've got a manager. And he'd go, "Third album? Fuck, we're not even done 4 gigs, you know." And I'd be like, "Yeah, but this is third album gear, man. This is Ivan Novello shit. What are you fucking talking about?"
And that's true. There's a famous clip of Oasis in the rehearsal room down the boardwalk in Manchester in 1992, and they're playing this song. This is long before they had any sniff of a record deal. And doesn't that just kind of scarily confirm that statement that Noel made at the beginning of this album? That there are but 1,000 days preparing for 1,000 years. This was literally true for them. Their big finale, their Hey Jude, was already written in 1992 before they were signed. This was all planned out. And following Earl's Court, the band did precisely what this song says. They travelled all around the world, spreading the word. Now, the version of this song we have on the album is 9 minutes long, but apparently the original version, according to Noel, was even longer. In Select magazine, Noel was asked, "Why did you sit on All Around the World for so long? 3 years ago you were telling people it was better than Hey Jude." And Noel responded, "I suppose now is the only time we can get away with having an 11-minute single out at Christmas. We sat on whatever because we didn't have the money to record it. We did that with an 8-piece orchestra, and this has got a 36-piece orchestra, the full lot. We didn't have the money to do it last time." In many interviews, Noel describes All Around the World as an 11-minute song, but on Be Here Now it was actually split, in the middle towards the end, into two halves, the main 9-minute song and then the 2-minute reprise. And interestingly, this oddly matches the shape of the world tour, which was split in the same way, with the absolute pinnacle, the high point, Knebworth, in the middle, but towards the end. You can kind of overlay the shape of the world tour with the length of the first part of All Around the World and the second part with that high point, that pinnacle, being represented by track 11 on the album. It's getting better, man. And that song that seems to fall on Knebworth is a song they literally debuted for the first time at Knebworth. So let's have a look at the lyrics. "Maybe the songs that we sing are wrong. Maybe the dreams that we dream are gone. Bring it on home and it won't be long. It's getting better, man. Hey, what was that you said to me? Just say the word and I'll be free. Yeah, that's the fire in the sky. It's getting better, man. And crashing in upon a wave, it's calling out beyond the grave. And when the stars are shining bright, it's getting better, man." Aren't those interesting, bittersweet lyrics for a moment that should have been their biggest celebration, their moment of victory? The dreams that we dream are gone? Are they? How come? Why do they talk about calling out beyond the grave? Who's going to die? What's going to die? Just say the word and I'll be free? Free from what? We could choose to see that talk of fire in the sky as being the fireworks at the end of Knebworth, or it could be something darker than that. It could be the end of an era, the end of the world. Later on, Paolo Hewitt would write this: "In dreams, I still touch the growing excitement of that amazing Knebworth weekend, culminating on Sunday night with fireworks in the skies and fireworks in our heads. I remember a lot of laughter. I remember a lot of arguing. I remember that period as one in which I seemed to greet the dawn more and more and see less and less of the day. It was all good." But Knebworth was the end of Oasis Phase 1. Two things now occurred. 1, the tabloids made them a priority. And 2, Oasis had no idea what to do next. Really, in the perfect world, they should have knocked it on the head. Everything up until Knebworth had been exciting and funny and exhilarating. Everything after became serious and professional. Maybe it had to be that way. Oasis, thanks to their attitude, fresh music and presence, were now a huge band adored in many countries. Their Be Here Now album sold nearly 700,000 copies on the day of its release, and that was just the UK. Success was everywhere, but something had to go, and that something was the spirit of fun and adventure that drove this band in the first place. And the lyrics to this song do contain in multiple places some strange, bittersweet, slightly negative vibes that you wouldn't necessarily expect. It was almost as if they knew that this was it, this was the high point, and that on some level it would all be downhill from here. And in a particularly poignant scene, Paolo also remembers being backstage, hearing the demos for Be Here Now kind of mixing with this sense of being lost and this aimlessness for Noel. After the show, as their friends partied backstage and the demos for the next album blasted into the night air, Noel and Marcus stood outside and wondered where on earth they could now take Oasis and keep it interesting and keep it vibrant. It was the biggest problem facing the band. But we're not quite finished talking about Knebworth yet, because do you remember I said that whole theme of there we were, now here we are was a central theme on this album? Well, that's a line directly from their first ever release, the song Columbia, which they put out as a white label demo in 1993. We already saw how that theme was present in pretty much every picture in the cover art. But did you know they also reference that song, Columbia, in the song Be Here Now as well? In the outro to Be Here Now, they repeat the exact same outro from Columbia, singing Come on, come on, come on, and yeah, 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 over and over again in exactly the same way. And you know what the first song was in the set at Knebworth? That's right, Columbia. There we were, now here we are. That was not a coincidence. That was chosen on purpose. Once we were on the dole in Manchester, now we're on the stage at Knebworth. That song was not chosen at random, it was packed with meaning. And now we get to the crux of it, because that moment up on stage for Noel Gallagher, I believe, was actually the pivotal moment of this entire album. It's time to look at the one track on this album we still haven't talked about yet, and that's track 1. Do you know what I mean? And there's a reason I've left this one till last, because I believe this album both starts and finishes with Knebworth, and I think there is much more to the chorus lyrics than most people think. All my people, right here, right now. Do you know what I mean? And do you know where else he said those words?
This is history! Right here, right now, this is history! Right here, right now!
Do you know what I mean? That would also go on to be the name of the album documentary as well. And that is a quote from on stage at Knebworth, right in the middle, at the beginning of the second night. You can't get more central. Right here, right now. I wonder what Noel was thinking in that moment, right in the middle of it all, at the heights. How was he feeling up on stage in that specific moment, right there, right then, on August the 11th, 1996? If there ever was a time when all his people were together in one place, this was it. I see this album almost like a movie. The opening scene is Noel up on stage right here, right now at Knebworth, looking out over the sea of faces. That's track 1. And then we immediately flash back to a year ago to start telling the story of how we ended up here. And that's track 2. By the end of the album, the story has been told and we're back once again exactly where we started. But now we know the history. Step off the train all alone at dawn, back into the hole where I was born. The sun in the sky never raised an eye to me. Do you know what I mean? Flashes back to Manchester and sets the tone for that theme. There we were, now here we are. It literally says, coming in a mess and going out in style. And doesn't that match where we are now in the story?
You know, I'd moved to London with a fucking Adidas hold-all and a battered old acoustic guitar. I had a Rolls Royce now. We arrived in the music scene when it was barren, and Oasis left it superstars.
And in this song we have another line that's missing from the lyrics in the album. Around 5 minutes 10 in the song, there's a voice with a kind of wah-wah vocoder on it that says, "You know where you came from," or at least I think that's what it says. And then there's the drum sample in the background from the song Straight Outta Compton. That's a song about coming from one of the roughest areas in the country, and Noel and Liam grew up in a very rough area in this country. The song finishes with a challenge to bring it on home, which is a thing that a coach would say to a team to encourage them to finish the game, complete the battle, run the final most challenging leg of the race. And did you notice that song and the last song, It's Getting Better Man, use the same line? Bring it on home and it won't be long. I think this album is a single moment in time. We start with Noel on stage at Knebworth and we finish in the same place. And all the songs in between are retracing what happened in that past year, from August 95 and the Battle of Brit Pop to August 96 and Knebworth. A full year in the life, once again, to bring him and the band to that incredible freeze frame moment in time. But am I getting a bit over creative here? Is this really some concept album about defining and encapsulating some incredible moment in time? Is this album really about communicating exactly what it felt like to be Noel on that stage that night? Well, did you ever wonder where the name Be Here Now actually came from, both for the song and the album? It's not actually in the lyrics to any of the songs, including the song Be Here Now. Like Wonderwall, the track is named after a George Harrison song, which is in turn named for the famous hippie manifesto book Be Here Now. And keeping in mind my idea that this is about encapsulating a single moment in the present, a single moment in time, listen to this from the book Be Here Now. The author, Ram Dass, is following a young guru around and trying to learn from him. During these travels, he's starting to train me in a most interesting way. We'd be sitting somewhere and I'd say, "Did I ever tell you about the time that Tim and I?" And he'd say, "Don't think about the past, just be here now." Silence. And I'd say, "How long do you think we're going to be on this trip?" And he'd say, "Don't think about the future, just be here now." So why did they call the album Be Here Now? You don't even need the information about the book to kind of get the idea from the title. And now listen to what Mark Coyle said about the album and how it was meant to be understood.
Coyley and Phil, pals from Manchester, they've always summed this album up the best. It was just meant to be played once, on that day, high as a fucking kite, preferably in the park, pissed, then never to be listened to again.
Each of the 3 albums in Noel's Masterplan trilogy are structured in exactly the same way. The opening track is the statement of intent, the introduction. The last track is a projection into the future. And everything in between is a historical account of things that really happened, in that order, in real life. On What's the Story Morning Glory, the last track that projects into the future was Champagne Supernova, saying, "One day you will find me in a champagne supernova in the sky." The last song that was actually historical was the song Morning Glory. That song closed with the sound of helicopters, and did you notice that "Do You Know What I Mean" opened with the exact same sound, as if confirming that this album picks up precisely where the last one wrapped up. Before they took to the stage at Knebworth to perform Columbia, the sound of helicopters was blasted through the PA system, and they even put helicopters in the music video. And, as if we needed more hints that there's something here to decode, the second sound we hear, after the helicopters, is Morse code. Now, that Morse code is meaningless. I did another video deciphering it. It doesn't mean anything, but it's not there to be deciphered. It's there for a different reason. It's there to let the listener know there's something to decipher in the music itself. There's something to find in the brackets. Be Here Now is an album designed to encapsulate one day, one moment, a time that would only come once, high as a kite, in the park. And I would like to suggest that that park was Knebworth Park, and that this whole album and the story it contains is meant to be a snapshot of Noel in that single moment on August the 11th, right in the middle, looking out across the sea of faces in that crowd and thinking back, just for a moment, on the mad journey that took him there. If I was to ask you, how would you capture that in a sound, in an album, you'd probably say something ridiculously overblown, something larger than life. Something, basically, very like what they did. Did you know, when making this album, part of the mission was they had to record 96 tracks for every single song.
There was a theme on BA Now. It was just, fucking, I don't know.
Keep going.
Yeah, just keep it going. Keep it going.
This was a concept album about the heights, about excess, about never saying no to anything and filling everything up as full as it could get. But that's still not all. A moment ago, we looked at how Morning Glory ends with helicopters and Be Here Now starts with the same helicopters. Well, where does this story end, and what comes next? Well, this story ends with a massive climax at a music festival, with the sense that something worse is just around the corner. And look at how the very next album, Standing on the Shoulder of Giants, opens.
We put this festival on, you bastards, with a lot of love.
It opens at a festival. We have a man on stage at the Isle of Wight festival, but all hell is breaking loose. He's screaming at the people who are breaking down his walls. It literally picks up right where the last one left off. After Knebworth, the band went back all around the world for a few more tour dates, and so of course we get All Around the World Reprise, which was snipped off the end of the full 11-minute version, I believe. In an interview in June 97, Noel said, "It's Getting Better Man was going to be the last thing on the record. We were just going to keep the end going all the way until the end of the CD. Then we decided that All Around the World would fade back in for another 2 minutes with all the drums taken out, just the orchestra playing. It's a very mellow way to end an album. I had written about 8 separate pieces about a minute long that were going to come in after each song. But because the songs were so long, we could only get 74 minutes on the CD, and we would have had to make it a double CD, then the record company would have started charging ridiculous amounts of money to buy it. And perhaps one of those instrumental link tracks is what the Mustique demo of Trip Inside actually got replaced with. We don't know. But right at the end of the All Around the World Reprise, we get the sound of footsteps walking across a wooden floor, and the album ends with the sound of a door closing. And that's Brian Cannon, Oasis's art director, walking across the studio floor and closing the door on this trilogy, this era, and this story. And that came true in real life as well, in more ways than Noel could have foreseen. After this point, Brian Cannon and Owen Morris, the men behind the sound and style of the 90s stuff, were no longer involved. The band logo changed, Bonehead and Guigsy left, Noel's songwriting style changed, and British culture moved on, so that closing of the door on this era really was prophetic. And I think, really on some level, Noel knew, because after Be Here Now, the band took a very long break. And just a few years earlier, he had shown that he knew exactly what would happen if they took a long break. In the NME on June the 24th, 95, he was asked, "Why don't you take a little holiday? Why the rush to play more gigs and record all the time?" Noel replies, "The thing is, I've always thought that as a fan myself, you get all these bands who get a bit of success and then they go and have a year off. Why? There's all these bands who go, oh, we're having a year off to get our heads together, to find some fucking perspective or something. And then they come back and they find that music's moved on so much that the place they left has vanished and gone forever." And after Be Here Now, they did exactly that. And not just for a year. It was around 3 years with no new music. And everything Noel said he knew would happen in that interview happened. The 3-album box set Noel described was complete, never to be repeated, leaving us with just the mystery to unravel. Do you remember in track 7, Fade In Out, Noel said, "Today is just a daydream. Tomorrow will be cast away." At that time, they were still living the dream, but it's like they knew it was coming to an end. And then, in It's Getting Better Man, he said, "The dreams that we dream are gone." In an interview with Select, literally on that day, the 11th of August 96, a journalist asked him, will it get bigger? And bear in mind, this is on the second day of Knebworth. They haven't played the gig yet. This is right in the middle. Noel says, "I can safely say we won't be going any fucking bigger than this." It really is as if he knew what was coming next. But the last point I want to make is this. These 3-part stories that seem to be encoded into Oasis songs are fractal. Now, what that means is you can take a song like Do You Know What I Mean, and that song on its own functions as a complete, standalone 3-act story with a beginning, a middle and an end. I've actually done a whole separate video on the standalone story of that song. But when you pull the camera back, it stops being its own story and becomes just a chapter in the bigger story of the album. If you look at the story behind Be Here Now, it divides very cleanly and very easily, once more, into 3 distinct acts. But then you can pull the camera back further, and as we've already seen, and as Noel said, it's a 3-part story, a 3-part box set. At heart, really, I think Noel is both a songwriter and a storyteller. Because if you pull the camera back one more time, you can see that the big story, the overarching story, actually isn't finished quite yet. Because the first 3 albums in the big picture are Act 1. the next 4 albums that represent the time of struggle, the band's kind of dark night of the soul, are Act 2. And Act 3, as of 2026, hasn't happened yet. And I think Noel knows that this story isn't actually finished. I wonder when, or if, that's coming. Because if it is, if this story is going to be completed, if this tale is actually going to be properly resolved, then the real, true, big finale is still, at the time of filming, yet to come. A massive thank you to my Patreon supporters for encouraging me to get this video made, and if you'll be interested in signing up to Patreon, the link is in the description. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, as well as anything you think I might have missed. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.